Earlier this year, I did a survey, and one of the things, I mean, overwhelming, it was so many people that said that they were stuck in their photography, not very creative, not having a lot of fun, not doing anything different, taking the same photo over and over again. I've got a cure for that if you're into wildlife photography, but if you give it a chance and you consider the possibilities beyond that, okay, I think you can open up so many different creative potential areas for your photography. So I'm going to walk you through the process of, you'll see my aha moment. You'll see when I went to, I went to capturing just a normal photo to using a longer shutter speed for bird photography, which people don't usually do, and it wasn't for panning. And then we're also going to do some Photoshop at the end of it because it really ties it together. But if you can make the jump to, this is a stationary subject with something moving around it, those opportunities exist everywhere in the world. A person sitting reading a book with cars going behind them, a mountain with clouds going past it. There's so many different places where you can use something like this. But it all happened from me just walking around on a spot that I go to for photography. There was nothing going on, and I saw an egret sitting on a railing, and it wasn't moving. And so I'm like, I'm not going to go home with nothing. So let me just take, it wouldn't move. I could get really close to it. And I'm going to take a really tight shot of the face with all the feather detail and everything. At least I have a shareable photo. And at that point, it hit me of something else that I can do that's really creative. So let's jump on the computer and we can watch the whole process here. So we're in Lightroom and let's just walk through the progression. So I'll press the letter I a couple of times. You can see some photo info here. I just thought, at this point, there was really nothing to photograph, and there was a snowy egret sitting there, and I just thought the crisp blue sky with the white, especially the feathered detail, because I was able to get so close to it, I would make something with a really close-up portrait. All right, so again, I'm not winning any awards with this, I'm not going to win any contests, but as a hobbyist, I think sometimes we're out there just because we enjoy shooting. So I started photographing the egret and just getting all these different, you could see the feathers blowing in the wind there. And at some point I dropped my shutter speed down to 1,000th of a second and I noticed a little bit of blur. Some of it's depth of field blur, but some of it's also motion blur. I noticed a little bit of blur and then it hit me. Like, I've done this with landscapes. You can, a mountain with clouds on a windy day and you do a slower shutter speed and you catch some movement in the clouds. This snowy egret was just sitting there. So, and it wasn't moving a lot. So why don't I try a little bit of a slower shutter speed with that? All right. So at that point, I go and I drop down to 1,000th of a second. I was at 2,500th just because I was trying to photograph birds in flight. Dropped down to 1,000th. I didn't need that. And it gives me some ISO back because I'm on auto ISO. And at that point, I dropped myself down to, I think this was 250th of a second. So what happens? Well, now there's too much light going in, okay? Because I'm at f6.3, I'm at ISO 100. As my shutter speed gets too slow, now there's too much light going in. So now I have to adjust for that. Let's bring up some photo info here. So you can actually see I switched this to f11, okay? Because the idea is as I let the shutter speed go slower, I'm letting more light in. And for every time that I do that, I need to close down the aperture or, a higher f-stop number so that I'm letting less light in because I need to balance. That's a whole balancing act there. So I started to do that because I was already at ISO 100. There's nothing I could do on ISO. So 200th of a second, now we can really start to see some motion blur happening in there. I'll go down, I'm at f11. Now I'm at f16 and 1/80th of a second. You can really start to see some blur happening. Now at this point, you will start to get some blurry photos. I'm shooting at a high frame rate. So that way I know that something's gonna be sharp, okay? Now, some of the blurry photos is a combination of two things. Number one, 1/80th of a second, I'm hand holding 600 millimeters. It's not very practical, okay? If it was a 24 millimeter wide lens and I was trying to shoot a landscape at that, yeah, I'd be definitely more successful. But with 600 millimeters hand holding, and I don't shoot with a tripod for my wildlife, it's a little harder. And then there's also going to be some motion in the bird. Okay, the bird was sitting mostly still, but it would move every once in a while. So you'll see, you know, there you go. They're plenty sharp, right? There's a lot of motion in the feathers, and then plenty sharp as far as the eyes and the texture on the bird go. So that's what I was looking for. I'm trying to get the bird sitting still, me getting a sharp photo of it with a little bit of motion happening from the wind blowing the feathers. Okay, so as we walk through these, it just becomes a matter of picking the one that you want. But let's transition this over into the Photoshop tutorial, because what's eventually going to happen is, you know, you can see I've got hundreds here, so it's time to go through and delete them. But what'll happen is you'll get to the point where you'll find one that you really like the motion, and this is what happened to me. I really like the blurry. This one was 1/50th of a second at f/25. I really like how blurry and smooth all of the feathers got up top. But this is one where, again, either me or the bird, let's just blame it on me, was moving a little bit, so I don't have a crisp, clear eye here. And then a couple of photos later, I do. Okay, so 2 shots later, I've got a perfectly crisp, clear eye, and everything else is sharp as well. So we can bring the best of both of these together, although this looks cool too. But let's just say you found one that's got better feathers. What we can do is bring those together. So I'm going to go down here in my film strip, and we're going to click on one, and we're going to hold down the Command key on Mac or Control key on PC and click on the other one since it's not right next to it. So I've got both of them selected. I'm going to head up here to the photo menu. I'm going to go down to edit in, and I'm going to open them as layers into Photoshop, because this will stack the two of them on top of each other. Very quick word from our sponsor as we jump over into Photoshop. If you're into bird photography, make sure you swing by and check out my bird photography course on the website. There's a link in the description. You can see the entire outline. It is one of those courses that I get emails from. It's probably one of the top courses where I get feedback from people saying this changed their bird photography. Not only making it easier and making everything make sense, but also they're having more fun with it. Because when you're better at something, you tend to have a little bit more fun with it. So we talk about the cameras and the settings and all that and the gear. It's not camera specific, so I talk about some of the naming conventions and some other camera models and whatnot. Talk about autofocus quite a bit, back button focus, how to find the bird in the lens, how to track the birds, all that different stuff, but also the creative stuff. What to look for, how to position yourself in the best lighting angles. There's a lot of charts and diagrams and things that I share when it comes to aperture and lighting and all those different things that help you really understand what's going on. Position yourself to get the best photo possible. So I hope you'll swing by and take a look. Okay, back over to our tutorial. We're now in Photoshop, and you can see Lightroom stacked both of them on top of each other. We've got the sharp one on the bottom. I can even double click and rename that photo sharp, and the top one blurry, so that we can just know by looking at them. I prefer, and this is totally, it doesn't matter either way. I always prefer to put the sharp one on top. It just makes a little bit more sense for me, but you don't have to do it that way. You can just do whatever I do here in reverse. But I like to put the sharp one on top. And now the only thing we need to do is align the two of them, because you can see they're not going to be perfectly aligned. And the more aligned we get them, the easier the task is. Couple of different ways to do it. You could just reduce the opacity of the top layer, take your move tool and move it around. But there's something that's a little bit more accurate than that. And that is to click on the top layer and then shift click on the bottom layer. So they're both targeted over here in the layers panel. Okay. Then you can come up to the edit menu, go down here to auto align layers, and Photoshop, just choose the auto option. Photoshop will go through and align those two layers the best that it can. Okay. Now, you'll be wildly more successful with this if you have a similar head position like I do here. If you had one position where the bird's looking straight at you, one where it's looking to the side, it's going to be a lot harder to do something like this. But since they're both pretty close to the same head position, it overlaid them on top of each other really nice. So now it just becomes a matter of masking. I'm going to go to the top layer here. I'm going to go down to the bottom, and I'm going to click on Add Layer Mask. So now I have a mask on the layer. The layer mask is white. You have to affect the layer mask in some way because I want to reveal the layer that's below it. The only way you can do that if the layer mask is white is to paint on it with black. So I'm going to go to my brush tool, set the foreground color down here to black, and then I'm just going to paint, and then you're going to see I'm going to start to reveal the original, or not the original, but the layer that was right below it. All right, so it gets a little funky over here. Looks like the back is a little bit, there's not quite, the alignment isn't perfect. So at that point, you just decide, do you want to do the work to try to realign it, or just leave maybe a mix of the two together there. But if I hold my shift key down, I can click on this layer mask, and that'll turn that layer mask off. So you can see that's before, and then that's merging the two together to get a lot of blur there. And that's personal taste. You may actually like the before better, and by all means feel free to go that way. But in this example, I liked, a lot of motion inside the feathers there. On that photo, because it was blurry, I wasn't able to get the best of both worlds, and this is how you do it. And then all you gotta do is hit the file menu, just hit save. Don't change name, don't change location or anything. You just save it, and it just comes back over to Lightroom, and you'll see eventually a copy of your photo will appear with the other photos in there, which at that point you can now do whatever you need to with that version of the file. So as you see here, we'll take this one, make my film strip a little smaller, take this one over into edit. And I think the first thing we need to do, because once we did the alignment, we did lose a little bit of the image is skewed a little bit, but I'm fine with that because I was going to do a really tight crop on the head on this one, so I don't need to see the bottom. You can see there's a railing and everything down there. It doesn't look very nice, so that's a little bit more along the lines of how I would finish this one off and crop it. As I said earlier, if you can open yourself up to the possibilities that this is a stationary subject with things moving around it, that exists everywhere in the world in so many different places. So there's so many times where you can use this technique. Also, if you're interested in another follow-up video here, if you're into wildlife photography, chances are high ISO is always a problem and you have to do some noise reduction. I wanted to share a video with you where I talk about how I felt about noise reduction software, how I was wrong about how I felt about noise reduction software, and how I incorporated some software that I eventually tried out into my photography workflow.